Hello, my name is Mary O'Connor. I'm the partner in charge of the Forensic and Valuation Services Division of Sikich LLP. Today we will be discussing fraud, insider threat, and cybersecurity concerns for the construction and real estate industries. The subject that we're really introducing today is we've all gone remote, whether it's hybrid or fully remote. And it has brought a whole new range of fraud concerns, simple theft of money, to an incredible range of cybersecurity threats. We are going to be specific today to the construction and real estate industries, and hopefully we can shed some light for you on how to prevent financial fraud and how to secure your cyber systems so that fraud doesn't occur through that venue. Today, there are two of us speaking. Again, I'm Mary O'Connor, partner in charge with the Forensic and Valuation Division. Been doing this type of work for many decades. I like to think that I'm particularly good at creating the internal controls needed to address situations that cause fraud. Work for governments and private companies with a great deal of concentration in the construction industry. Kevin Bong is with us. He's director in our cybersecurity division, a wizard in this subject, and I think you will enjoy hearing his comments. Sikich, we are probably hopefully it's a company that you've heard of. We are 1,100 professionals strong, 90 partners located across the country. We are a full-service CPA firm with an incredible concentration in technology. About half of our revenues are high-end technology installation and fighting certain cybersecurity concerns. We tend to go to market in certain vertical specialties, construction being one of them. Okay, today we're going to discuss really two topics. How is financial fraud committed? What does the fraudster look like? How do they look now in a remote environment? A few emerging schemes within the remote environment. And then how to respond to a fraud or breach when it occurs. Kevin is going to go through the whole cybersecurity, talk about ransomware, talk about phishing schemes, and ultimately how to handle the breach when it happens and how you can protect yourself. So there are many ways in which financial fraud is committed. A person far smarter than me a long time ago thought of all of the ways that a company could get ripped off. And it turns out there's really three sort of general channels. There can be corruption, where there's conflicts of interest, special agreements with purchasers or suppliers, contract fraud. Contractors and real estate companies deal with this all the time because you're very contract intensive. Then there's the other side of the shop, financial statement fraud. This is why we have external auditors to try to protect us from financial statement fraud. But it's literally the willingness to manipulate financial information to make the financial statements fraudulent so that a third party will make the wrong decision. Anybody who's in business lives in this realm, but honestly, it's a rare type of fraud and not one that we're going to be really discussing today. This is really more like wallpaper. If we go to the next slide, under asset misappropriation, cash can either be stolen or goods can be stolen. And what's on the slide in front of you here is really all of the ways and methods that financial fraud, the actual theft of cash or goods, can occur. And it can occur in your credit card system, your cash and receivables system. It can occur. It can last over 20 years, particularly if you do not have good separation of duties. But it can There's only a finite number of ways that it can happen, and these are all examples of how it can happen. Ghost payroll, ghost vendors. A lot of it is pretty common sense, but yet it's this graph, it's this chart that every internal control system that wants to prevent fraud works with to ensure that internal controls surround each of these boxes so that fraud is less likely to occur. I've also been doing this long enough to know that everybody has fraud, and if they don't have it currently, they will. It is a subject that every company deals with. Most deal with it very poorly, and there's an emotional reason for that. People don't want to be defrauded. Fraud is inherently a crime against someone's trust. And so our brains don't like to think about it, and most companies don't believe that fraud would really happen to them. But particularly in the remote environment, there is an amazing surge in financial fraud because almost all internal control systems have broken down, some very profoundly. Folks have delayed fixing those internal controls because they think, well, someday we'll be back to normal. Well, hello, this is normal. So a lot of the hard work that needs to happen around control systems has not happened yet, and consequently there's a great deal of fraud. Or the flip side, fraud that has been occurring, let's say over the last 10 or 20 years, is now bubbling to the surface. So there's many more frauds being caught, or at least we suspect them. So it's an unusual time, but welcome to the new normal. But everybody's sitting back and say, well, then every year I hire an external auditor and they give me a clean opinion, or they give me a good review, or they get my tax returns out the door. And in my mind, I'm thinking, and therefore I have no fraud, because how could they possibly audit me? How could I possibly have my books balanced and accounts reconciled? It must be because I have an audit that I have no fraud. This is not true. It's one of the great misconceptions. An auditor is licensed to make sure that your statements conformed to some third-party standard, generally GAAP. That's what they do. A good auditor will check your internal controls, and they'll send you a management letter that basically says, if fraud was to occur, it would probably occur right over here because you haven't done the hard work to ensure there's good separation of duties or a good check and balance. But they're about your statements and how they conform, not about finding fraud. Because fraud also happens a drip at a time. Drip, 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 and all of a sudden you have a river of money. So the individual acts of fraud tend to fall under their materiality threshold. And the other thing, this is what's always fascinating, very often the person who is committing the fraud is the person in charge of handling the audit. And so they can purpose-built, take their attention away from where it should be directed. So a clean audit opinion does not mean you do not have fraud. So while external auditors are an essential component of a good fraud prevention system, they are not sufficient because that is not their job. It's other work that you need to do. The profile of a fraudster, fraudsters tend to be middle-aged. They tend to be kind of evenly divided, male and female. The person with more responsibility, maybe not on the organization chart, but for whatever reason, many jobs have fallen into their lap, and they've been entrusted with a number of functions. So they have a lot of ability to take money. They always do it for a reason. They're the most entitled people in the world. It is every fraudster that I meet has a personality that if you're kind of trained in this, you can see it coming. They rarely have not even a parking ticket on the outside, but they believe for some reason they deserve the money they have taken. They haven't gotten enough raises, or they're not prepared for retirement, or they've got a terrible gambling habit that they have to fuel, or they have a very expensive hobby, or they feel their family deserves a better lifestyle than what they're able to provide. And you'd be amazed at how much money they can take out and spend, and very rarely is there any money left by the time we get them to admit to their fraud. The other thing is that you can never is a bad word. 99% of the time you can see a fraud in the documents, but you can't prove that somebody actually did it. So you play on their personality. Because they are so entitled, you put them in a situation and you say, you know, I certainly understand if you needed to take some money or you felt you were justified, and then you just let them go. They self-disclose everything. They will tell you how they did it, when they did it, why they did it. And so that's ultimately how you, quote-unquote, catch a fraudster. It's a very interesting line of work. If you suspect fraud, please don't sit the person you suspect down and try to do a law and order on them. Let professionals do that for you, but it's one of the most fascinating sides of business. These folks are identifiable, and they are almost always the same. Now, I'm going to give you the one thing that I passionately believe in. Your external auditor is not going to find fraud. They find it once in a while, but really not much. Internal audit isn't really too bad. Overwhelmingly, the way you will first get knowledge that a fraud may be occurring is from an employee tip. Overwhelmingly. So you got to make sure you have a whistleblower system. I'm amazed that companies still don't have a good whistleblower system. The logic usually is, well, we're going to have all kinds of calls. It's going to drive me crazy. You'll almost never get a call. But the calls you get to act on them. And later on in the talk, we'll give you some professional tips. But your whistleblower system generally needs to be by a third party. It needs to be absolutely anonymous. It has to be, the employee cannot fear reprisal, and the organization must see you act on the tips. And if you have a system that does those three things, you will probably have solved at least 70% of the opportunity to commit fraud in your organization. The other thing is to have fraud training, and I mean, it stops fraud cold. So bring folks in like the folks at Sikich to teach your organization how to look out for fraud, and things will change. And I am going to let Kevin take over. He has tell you about things that are really scary. Kevin, go ahead.
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to talk about some of the key cybersecurity threats that we're seeing today. Again, Sikich is a forensic investigator as well as other things, so these are really based on what we're seeing happening to folks in the industry. And the first one is account takeover. We call it account takeover. It encompasses a lot of things. We call it account takeover because it almost always starts with someone breaking into an email account. They break in either through guessing a password, stealing a password, or through like a phishing attack that again steals a password. And you might think, I think forever people thought, well, breaking an email account, that's not that much of a risk for us, not realizing how much of a risk it is until it happens. Because, nowadays we rely on emails for so much. Those email accounts that can then lead to a lot of the fraud attacks, not so much insider fraud, but things like manipulating someone into changing payroll information inadvertently, or sending an ACH transaction or wire to the wrong bank or something like that. A lot of that is initiated by break into an email account. Password resets. You know how many different online accounts you have that work through those password resets. And we're seeing them getting more and more creative. One we've seen lately has been shipping fraud, where they get the in your inbox, they see the notification that, hey, your item has been shipped, especially if it's like a commercial item, 20 iPhones for your employees. They'll get the details for that shipment. They'll contact the shipping company and say, hey, please hold that at the warehouse, and we'll have this person come and pick it up instead. And suddenly those 20 iPhones for your employees you were expecting never show up. So yeah, account takeover, we're seeing a lot of that. I just want to touch on it. Your biggest protection here is multi-factor authentication on your email. So you're probably used to logging into your email, just with user ID and password. But every email system nowadays, whether it's Microsoft-based, whether it's Google-based, whichever, has the ability for like a two-factor, two-step authentication, where at least the first time you log into it, you also have to get an SMS text on your phone or enter a code from your phone or something like that. Big help in stopping these attacks. Not 100%. We're working some cases where people had multi-factor authentication in place, and either through tricking people or other backdoors, they're still getting into the email accounts. So be aware of what's in email accounts. Avoid sending passwords. Avoid having credit card numbers. After an account takeover happens, half the effort that a lot of people hire us for is to go in and see what the attacker could have had access to. Who do we need to notify that mailbox was compromised? And that's never good for your reputation. But just as common and much, much more impactful for organizations nowadays are ransomware attacks or cyber extortion. And first I'll talk through kind of your experience, if you have one of these attacks, what it looks like. And it starts with kind of this slide you see here. You walk in the morning on a Monday, and your employees are all saying, hey, we can't get to our files, we're seeing this message about things being encrypted, and somebody's asking for Bitcoin, and suddenly you can't work. You're just dead in the water, none of your files are available, and kind of goes from there. And this is happening to so many organizations right now because we're at a time where it's the perfect storm for ransomware attacks. It starts with email habits, that people trust a lot of stuff that comes in email, especially if it comes from someone trusted. And we just talked about email account takeover, where even if it's coming from a mailbox you trust, maybe it's a message you can't trust. Combine that with remote access. A lot of organizations, because of the COVID, spun up a lot of remote access services very quickly and maybe not as securely as they should have been. Combine that with password practices. For years and years, the industry's been saying, "Hey, 8 characters with complexity is a great password." Well, it's not great. You have people using company name 123 matches the criteria, but it's a password we can guess. Summer 2021, great password. Not really. We can guess that because we know the patterns people use. And finally, and the biggest part of this is the emergence of cryptocurrency. Never before has there been a way for an attacker to request a 6 or even 7-figure ransom and get it paid completely anonymously, almost immediately. And so it's changed the landscape from attackers targeting, retail organizations where they could do credit card theft, or healthcare organizations where they could get sensitive information like Social Security numbers that they could use for tax fraud or things like that. Now everyone is a target. The smallest real estate office, construction offices, whatever it is, you're a target because the attackers know that if they can take over your computers and hold them even for a handful of days and it holds your data ransom, you'd rather pay $100,000, or maybe you've got cyber insurance that'll pay $100,000 to get you up and running a couple days faster rather than lose the money and the time of being down those days. And it's not just the being down those days. You do have that aftermath of your offline. A lot of times they're going in and not only... The thing to be aware of about these ransomware attacks today is it's not the ransomware of 10 years ago where you got a virus on your computer and it put a screen on a picture on your screen that said, "Hey, we've locked your computer. Do this and we'll unlock your computer." It's evolved so much because of the amounts of money they're getting through cryptocurrency that the hacker organizations that are doing these ransomware attacks are using tools and techniques that used to be reserved for like nation-state attacks and large attacks against big retailers and things like that. They're using those against mom and pop businesses because again, $100,000, $200,000 ransom paid out to them for just a little bit of effort when they take that. So what they're doing is they're getting a foothold through a phishing attack, through breaking into a computer with a virus. Just get one computer on your network. From there, they do what we call elevation of privileges, where they look for ways to get admin access on the network by stealing passwords off the network, by breaking into other computers that might have them in, password files or things like that. They take those admin credentials and they use them to log into, servers, log into backups, and start encrypting or deleting those critical components. And they hide on the network for a while, get all that information, wait for Friday night when everybody's gone home for the day, and start encrypting stuff. It's very planful. They've been watching you for a while, and they're trying to have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. They encrypt. They make the ransom demands. Hey, pay us a ransom and get your data back. They also have what we call malware shaming sites. Here's a screenshot of one where they're saying, hey, here's a list of companies that we've broken into. Here's 5% of the data we've stolen from them. And if they don't pay up, we're going to post the other 95%. And so what is that? How much sensitive data do you have that you don't want showing up on the internet that are on your computers today? So yeah, pretty impactful when these happen. There are a number of things you can do to help protect against that. Again, the top one here is multi-factor authentication for remote access. So if you spun up remote desktops or VPN or anything like that for your employees, make sure it's user ID, password, and a code or something from their phone. And not just for remote access, but for email, again, because account takeovers are often the first step in the right phishing attack or something that tricks somebody into giving that backdoor. The next one here, a good commercial antivirus installed, not the one that came kind of pre-installed with the computer, but buy something and then turn on the bells and whistles. Like don't try to turn it off because it's getting in the way. Because those bells and whistles, what I call them, are the things that catch these manual techniques of the attackers, where they've already gotten a foothold and now they're trying to elevate privileges, trying to move around your network and see what's there. So commercial antivirus can definitely help that. Getting patches for your computers, if you're in a bigger organization, that's centralized patch management. For a small organization, it's at a minimum, making sure the patches are turned on, going around periodically to see that they're getting applied to computers. And not just for the operating system, for things like your web browsers. And a really important one that people are missing today is firewalls. In the last year, we've seen for a number of different firewall vendors critical vulnerabilities that allow people to take advantage of, like break into a VPN service and break into your network through your firewall. And people don't think to patch these because it's not like your Windows computer that tells you it needs to be patched. And that's why these firewall patches can go kind of uninstalled for quite some time and allow some of those backdoors and footholds. The next one here, really important, protecting your backups. Once an attacker gets a foothold on your network, the first thing they're trying to do is find your backups so that during the attack they can destroy them, delete them. We've seen them, if you've got like a network disk-based system, reset to factory defaults to delete all your data. So you can protect yourself from that kind of backup destruction by making sure that backups are offline. If you're a really small office and you're backing up to a USB drive, get a second USB drive and rotate them every day. One's offline, one's plugged in, and that way if somebody does a ransomware attack, the one that's not plugged in isn't accessible by the attacker. Cloud-based backup services are great for this. They especially making sure that cloud has multi-factor authentication. So all your data is going up to the cloud, and even if the attacker steals all your passwords, they can't get to that cloud and delete your backups. Other key things, how you manage your administrator accounts. If you're a small office and kind of the office manager is also the domain admin on your kind of Windows environment, that person, he or she, should have two separate accounts. One that he uses every day for his or her email and things like that, and a separate one for when they need to do administrative tasks. Because what you want to do is prevent the attacker from being able to steal that administrative password or anything related to it. Passwords are, I mentioned earlier, passwords are really terrible nowadays. The 8+ characters are easy to break, easy for computers to brute force crack, to get a clear text password from an encrypted password, things like that. So the industry is saying, go to 15-character passwords. We call them passphrases because we say you don't need to have complexity enabled. You don't need to rotate them. The big thing is the length. So make it easier for your people to go to a 15-character passphrase, a short sentence that they can remember, and don't have all those other rules in place, and they'll adopt it easier. Really quickly, filtering outbound traffic at your firewall with like a content filter and things like that to block some, command and control. Retaining logs. So many times when a breach happens, we go and look at your Windows environment and it's set for default logging, which is 1 or 2 days of security event logs, to be honest. And if the attack happened even a week ago, some of the logs which might tell us where did they come in, how did they come in, what do we need to fix to keep them from coming back in, are already gone 6 days later. Phishing awareness exercises. There's a lot of organizations out there that you can hire to every quarter phish your employees and get them used to not clicking on phishing attacks. Really effective control. Security testing. If you think you're tight but you aren't testing that, you should be, because how else are you going to know what are you missing? Good tools there. Vulnerability scanning, penetration testing or ethical hacking. Having someone trying to break into your network. Sikich can do all those types of things for you. And finally, cyber liability insurance. I can't say enough as an organization about the importance of having this, because if you have a breach, a cyber breach, the costs of bringing in legal counsel to help you figure out what your notification requirements are. The cost of having someone like Sikich come in and do a forensic investigation and tell you how they got in and make sure they're out. Potentially the ability to pay a ransom and things like that. Definitely worthwhile to have that cyber liability insurance. And then from both Mary and myself, kind of what steps you should take if you think fraud is happening. Mary, I'll let you kind of start with this.
Yeah, and Kevin made after he scares us all to death with and these things are happening every day, where sort of my world and his world intersect, of course, is your world. Most construction and real estate companies are very contract intensive. You have those on your networks. All of the forms that are needed to get payments are in there. The contract's in there. You probably haven't made arrangements on how you're going to pay people ahead of time, what account money is going to be transmitted. So it's extremely easy for these cyber people to get in there, and just like Kevin said, they sit there and they find documents that they can extract, learn about, manipulate your business arrangement, and then they can act like the person who would ask you for a payment. And they'll bring in all the forms, and they'll have all of the payroll documents and everything they have to have because they got them off your computer. And then they'll ask generally somebody a little lower in the organization. They'll make friends with them and say, we just changed banks, so would you mind doing the ACH over to this account? Or, can I pick up the check? Don't let people pick up checks. This is happening so frequently, and also just some of for some of the larger contractors who are able to those wonderful signs that are in front of construction projects. The fraudster can just I know who the contractor is, who the major subs are. I'm gonna try to see what I can do to get into those into their websites. So what happens on that terrible day when you believe you've either gotten a tip or all of a sudden you're missing, $500,000 that a check that was cashed that shouldn't have been? What do? Well, believe me, you will not be in any mental shape to handle it well that day unless you've done a good plan. And so what I suggest to all of my clients is think through this process. So you get a tip. A tip should be vetted to see whether or not it's credible, and if it's credible, then you act upon it and you investigate it. You do it with a very small group of people. You don't really let anybody know you're investigating it until you're darn good and ready to let them know you're investigating it. You do your notifications, you call your insurer, you get your attorney involved, you get an employment lawyer involved. You hire forensic people. You secure the evidence. And then in a very short period of time, you investigate that allocation, that suspicion. You don't let it go. If it goes on for longer than 5 days, you're doing a bad job to know whether you've really got something that's really happening or not. And then you go through the process of strengthening your system. If something has gone horribly wrong, then there's a whole process. You bring in people like Kevin to image your system. You bring in people like me to investigate it. You make sure that evidence is secure. But the point is, it's all committed to paper. It's sitting in a binder on your shelf, and when you need it, you get the plan and you work the plan, because you will not be in any mental shape to do it well. In fact, you'll open yourself up to incredible litigation if you do this process incorrectly. So, Kevin, how about your side? Next slide.
Yeah, and on the cyber side, I can't tell you, there's so much involved in a cyber incident response. I can't tell you how to do that beyond, get some professionals involved. But I do want to, especially in the ransomware incidents, share some of the mistakes that are made when people kind of race into that. And I understand why. Certainly, it's easy to make these mistakes, and they all seem to start with assuming, making poor assumptions about what the attacker did or didn't do. There's a lot of times the assumption is the attacker's not in anymore because we found, it was Tom's account that was broken into and Tom changed his password. Well, not realizing that the attacker has all the passwords on the entire network. Thinking the attacker's gone where they still got some internet command and control. So, you really got to disconnect. You got to take care of all those administrative accounts. Not collecting the logs quickly enough because, like I said, some of those log files roll within a day or two. And if you wait even a day to start collecting logs, you've just lost some really important data about when the attack might have started. Really often people say, oh, well, they encrypted our network, but, why would they have stolen our database, or could they even found that? And it's really hard to get data out of that, so let's assume they didn't get data out of that. And then, 3 weeks later, they find out that the data from that database got posted to the internet on a shaming site. You don't want to be there. You have to pretty much assume and react as though any data they could have gotten to, they did get to, and what does that mean for you? And then finally, again, assuming the worst. I've seen organizations say, they encrypted the server, let's just restore it from backup, and so they wipe the server and start restoring and find out that the backup's no good. And if they still had the encrypted server, they could pay the ransom and decrypt it, but now they've lost that capability because they overwrote it because they didn't really have resources to recover next to it. So again, don't destroy any data, both for evidence purposes and for recovery purposes, until you know everything is good or you've completed the investigation. So that's some mistakes to avoid. Other than that, get some professionals involved. If you've got cyber insurance, start there, give them a call. Otherwise, certainly reach out to Sikich. We do incident response like this as well.
Well, thank you all for your time. Our contact information is on this slide. Kevin and I would be very happy to hear from you and very happy to help you on any of this, particularly the planning so that these incidents won't happen to you.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.